Hello and welcome back to another Should Use Spade. In this video we'll be looking at the rank 4 battle rating 5.3 Russian Bravy, a unique destroyer in both good and bad ways. So, to start off with, we'll look at the Bravy's armament. First of these, its primary armament, the dual 130mm guns in one turret at the front of the ship. These are the same versions of the Russian 130 as found on the other Spokony variants, and are slightly longer than the earlier Russian 130s. These guns carry high explosive, semi-armor piercing, and variable time fuse rounds. The VT rounds have less TNT filler, but with a higher velocity than the high explosive rounds. The reload rate varies between 5.2 and 4 seconds depending on your crew skill. This is acceptable for the battle rating, but a bit long for only 2 guns. The turret is not particularly well armored, but then again, that is to be expected of a destroyer. Though with only 1 turret, losing it can be quite detrimental to your firepower. When it comes to the turret reverse speed, it is pretty standard, with an 18 degree per second turning speed. These guns are often lauded as the best destroyer guns in the game. However, the main reason I do not like these guns is their rather inconsistent dispersion. Sometimes the 2 guns will be laser accurate and be right next to each other, right on target. Other times they'll be vertically so far apart that one shell will land 50 meters in front of a target, the other shell will land 100 meters behind it, and it's this inconsistency which really doesn't work for me. But oh well, it could also just be a skill issue on my end. Going on to the secondary armament, and most certainly the more interesting armament, we have the Volna M launcher launching V600P missiles. This is the only missile launcher on a blue water vessel. These are high explosive missiles with a payload of 42.24 kilograms of TNT equivalent. There are 2 missiles ready to launch on the launcher, before having to reload between 65 and 50 seconds, depending on crew skill. And this excludes the time it takes the launcher to reach the loading position, which is facing that forward. Bravy also carries 16 missiles in addition to the ones on the launcher, for a total of 18 to fire during a match. The launcher isn't armored, so can get knocked out easily. It's not usually a target people shoot at though, since the massive missile magazine below it cannot be detonated. This launcher can get on target pretty quickly thanks to its 40 degrees per second rotation speed, but there are some quirks with aiming with it. Namely, parallax. The launcher is so far back and so much lower compared to the sight that the missile has a bit of a hard time trying to ride the beam in the first few hundred meters. This can be compensated for by firing the missile at a closer angle to the ship's axis, so either right behind you or slightly off-axis forward, as your superstructure is in the way. This missile also has a few other quirks, mainly that its VT fuse has a minimum altitude. In the past, these missiles also proxied on torpedoes in the water. This should no longer be the case, but you never know if that bug appears again. You can also fire both missiles and guide them in at the same time. For actual anti-air duties, these missiles are a bit quirky again. You see, you have 2 modes for guiding it on target: line of sight and lead. The line of sight is the default guidance mode. It'll follow the beam that is your crosshair, as close as possible. In lead mode, however, the missile will determine the best intercept course to the target. This mode is only possible with a radar lock on the target. But here is yet another quirk. Bravy's radar is really bad at maintaining lock on propeller-driven aircraft, especially smaller single-engined aircraft, leading to constantly losing the lock, which in turn leads the missile to constantly switch between line of sight and lead targeting, which causes the missile to swing violently. I highly recommend you either don't even radar lock your target, or override the lead targeting mode by manually selecting the line of sight mode instead. Again, this only really matters for if you want to have a radar lock. This missile is perfectly functional without a radar lock, though I would recommend you lead your target aircraft just a smidge when using the line of sight mode. The missile has a large detonation radius and sometimes won't do meaningful damage to an aircraft if it isn't led properly. And for the final quirk, sadly, despite being a secondary weapon group, the AI gunners will never fire the missiles. Now, onto the final gun armament, we have the Tertiary battery, consisting of 3 quadruple 45mm gun turrets. If we can use the MPK-201K as a cheat sheet, then this gun only carries high explosive shells, in a 50-50 belt of high explosive fragmentation shells and high explosive fragmentation tracer shells. These guns do not seem to have a belt to reload, and if they do, they overheat long before that reload comes up. Their rate of fire is similar to that of a Bofors. The mounts themselves are again not particularly well armored, so don't expect these to take many hits before getting knocked out. The aiming speed is also similar to that of a Bofors, so perfectly fine. I would like to add that if you are playing Bravy, and you're in a situation where you have to rely on these 45mm guns as your anti-air defense, something has gone seriously wrong. Between both your missiles and the 130mm guns with VT, the 45s should never be the ones to have to shoot down an airborne attacker. Going then to the extra armament, we have the torpedoes and the rockets. The rockets are 96 RBU 2500s in 2 launchers next to the bridge. These sadly are not the legendary RBU 6000s, so you shouldn't consider them as a viable weapon under almost all circumstances. They don't pack much of a punch either, with 25.8 kg of TNT equivalent apiece. The torpedoes on the other hand are exceptionally good. In realistic battles, these travel 12 km at a speed of 126 km an hour, lightning fast, and with a very respectable range for a 300 kg TNT equivalent warhead. These torpedoes are only found on Bravy, and are a valuable complement to your main armament. The launch angles are equally respectable, but it will expose quite a bit of your ship to use them. The only downside to these torpedoes is that you can only carry 5 of them. So, going from armament to mobility, the Bravy is pretty standard, going anywhere between 56 and 66 km an hour depending on your modifications. Its rudder response is also pretty standard for a destroyer, but it does lose quite a bit of speed in the turn. It turns rather sharp for its size, but Bravy is a relatively big destroyer, so keep that in mind. It can feel a little bit sluggish to respond to engine inputs, so that could also just be my crew skills acting up. In terms of survivability, Bravy has some kind of armor plating near the waterline, not visible in the hangar, but there is definitely something there. In terms of detonations, there's nothing that really can explode on the Bravy, other than maybe the anti-air ammo amidships, and the ready ammo of the main gun, maybe. And again, as odd as it may sound, the missile storage cannot detonate. So all in all, the survivability of Bravy is not particularly strong or weak for a destroyer. The crew layout is also standard, pretty much all over the hull, concentrated near the engines. But not below the anti-air guns, interestingly. Now, one thing you do have to keep in mind for survivability is that it's pretty standard for a destroyer. However, Bravy is a 5.3 destroyer, so you'll be facing a lot of heavy guns, which some other destroyers might not have to face. So, in terms of playstyle, Bravy is very reserved. You do not want to draw attention to yourself, your missiles allow for long-range fighting without much difficulty, while being useful against enemy destroyers and some lightly armored cruisers. I do want to stress though that these are not anti-ship missiles. They can pen 70mm of armor at most. Most heavier cruisers will shrug these missiles off. The torpedoes are excellent backups with their range and speed, but their low number doesn't allow for them to become main weapons. The guns, while I've been told are excellent, their inconsistent dispersion makes me not a fan. I would not recommend close-range engagements unless you have some torpedoes to spare and get the guns to behave. So, to summarize, the firepower is good, but somewhat situational. Anti-air is exceptional, obviously. The torpedoes are also exceptional, just a shame that there's only 5. Mobility is standard, nothing special for the ship type. Survivability is poor, but mainly thanks to its battle rating. The Bravy doesn't have any particular weaknesses compared to other destroyers, but 5.3 is not a forgiving battle rating for the ship type. And again, the playstyle is reserved/cautious. Verdict? Spaded. The BR is a major negative for the ship, and while I'm not the biggest fan of its main guns, Bravy is a truly unique blue water vessel. It is a very interesting ship, and on that basis alone I would recommend spading it. Though know that as with many odd ships, your enjoyment of the Bravy will heavily depend on the whims of the matchmaker. And that is all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.